Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, 27-year veteran of the NYPD. A lot of happenings now in the Kohberger case, and all of the things that we perhaps predicted are turning out maybe not to be true. Although you see the thumbnail on the screen, concern in jury pool, the Kohberger case, that's 100% true. And we're going to get into how to pick a fair jury in the Kohberger case, at least what the prosecution and the defense, as well as Judge Hippler, will be doing to ensure a fair, objective voir dire, and to have both sides have this process work for them so they can seat only the people that they will consider to be fair jurors. And that's what they want. And later on in the show, we're going to go over a jury questionnaire, not because the one is not published for the public to see, although allegedly we're hearing thousands, hundreds, perhaps thousands of people are receiving these jury questionnaires in the form of in the mail, and they're being called into the court to turn in, of course, their jury questionnaire. And then from that, they will have to pick 12 jurors and 8 alternates. So out of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, they're going to pick 12 jurors and 8 alternates. And we're going to get into more about this case, but it also looks like Judge Hippler is full steam going ahead with this case in a timely fashion on August 11th. It doesn't seem like he's going to grant the continuance because the juror questionnaires have gone out. Why would they go out, and why would they go ahead with trying to select a jury if he intended to give a continuance? The other thing is that the alternate suspect, that looks like it's not going to happen either. So some interesting rulings. And this judge is no nonsense. He's going to move forward. This case is going to move forward. And we're going to discuss how they're going to go about picking a fair and impartial jury. So, folks, hold on to your hats. Hold on to your loved ones. Hold on to your service dog. Hold on to your cup of coffee. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone. The police off the cuff zone.
There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And now a word from our sponsor. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball season is in full swing, and we're into the NBA and NHL playoffs. And BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are being played. With the largest selection of odds on everything from Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL, and UFC, BetOnline remains the best online source for all your sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the BetOnline Casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. BetOnline, the game starts here. So a lot of real movement in this case that we perhaps didn't expect this quickly. But to discuss this case with me, and he's the perfect guy to have, is retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Welcome, Mike.
Bill, thank you for having me on. Good to see you. Thank you.
You know, Mike, I didn't think, I was a little concerned that Judge Hippler might grant the continuance.
Right.
I was just feeling that he may think to himself, oh, this, if I don't grant this continuum, then perhaps this will lead to an appeal. But you know something, I think that no matter what a judge does, he could be perfect in a death penalty case. The defense will find some hole in what he did or she did to lodge an appeal. So he can't run scared. He's got to be the judge that he is. And he's making decisions like the Judge Stephen Hippler that he is.
Yeah, Bill, people don't realize judges are gods in their courtroom, and they won't be overturned on appeal unless it's really patently obvious that they made a mistake. So he has tremendous discretion to go either way, and to grant a continuance if he wishes for some length of time, or to plow ahead with the trial that is almost already 3 years in the making from December. So we're already 2.5 years. So therefore, he's not going to lose control of this courtroom. He's not going to give the ability to Ann Taylor to postpone this any longer. And after all, what is 30 days or 60 days going to do? You have, so he's figuring, I'm going to make the decision. I'm going to live with it. I'm in the bounds of my discretion. It's not clearly an erroneous decision. Therefore, I'm going ahead with it. And we're going to have our trial, and we're going to start August 11th. And that is it. And I think everybody is the better for it.
Mike, even though the defense has been claiming they need more time, they need more resources, they need time to present an alternate suspect, it's been over 2 years. It's been over 2 years. So the judge fully knows that. The public fully knows that. And most of all, the families of these 4 victims know that. And some people point out in what has been referred to as the Kohberger crew, the people that think Bryan Kohberger is innocent, they've pointed out that he's been in jail for 2 years while he awaits trial on this case. And the Kohberger case has a problem with that, or the crew, The point is that if you recall, Bryan Kohberger waived the speedy trial right in the very beginning. So this is partially or almost entirely his fault that he's still in jail.
Billy, yeah, you're right. People don't realize way back, I think it was in after he was first arrested in December of 2022, there was originally a trial set for some time in like October of 2023. And he then, because his attorney invoked his right to a speedy trial in accordance with Idaho law. And then I guess because they weren't getting discovery quick enough, they decided to ask for extensions and waive their right to a speedy trial. And they thought that would be helpful for them because they have to get the discovery, whatever it comes in, it's not going to come in all at once in one big package with a ribbon on it. They got to do that. But Ann Taylor also has to be responsible for managing her office. She has to have office assistants and paralegals to go over information. And a lot of it is, not really applicable to the day and time in question. It's other things. So therefore, for her to be a micromanager, like she admitted to Judge Hippler, is a real disservice to Bryan Kohberger because she has to handle her office staff and assign them properly. For whatever reason, she's unable to do that, asking for continuous after continuous after continuous after you're claiming that your client is innocent, I think is a disservice. The idea that there's going to be an alternative suspect mentioned is probably shot down already. That's probably not going to happen. Judge Hippler is not going to allow her to bring that theory before the jury. And so therefore, it's now time for both Mr. Thompson, the district attorney, and Ann Taylor. It's time to put up. And this is what he's doing. He's taking charge of this case, and it's going to go as scheduled.
Mike, very, very interesting because you're right. The late hour of this case, 2 years in, she decides to raise an alternate suspect defense, claiming that she got this information from one of the 10,000 tips that the government received, that the police received. And all of a sudden it occurs to her, oh, there's another suspect. Well, I don't buy that. I totally don't buy it. And guess what? either does Judge Hippler, because I don't believe he's going to allow it. He sealed it, so no one else would know what it is or was, but it doesn't appear that he's allowing that at all. You're 100% correct, Mike.
Yeah, no way, because she has a theory, and that's nice, but you cannot put that theory before the jury unless you have a reliable foundation of some sort of evidence. And she doesn't have any. So Stephen Hippler is not going to let her do it, because if he did allow her to do it, to name someone as a suspected murderer, that is defamation. That you can't do that. No way. Hippler is absolutely right on this.
And Mike, in the same way that the prosecution has to reveal discovery, wouldn't the defense have to reveal all this information to the prosecution if they're going to bring up an alternate suspect and let the prosecution investigate this person also?
Absolutely. It's like putting out an alibi. Remember the alibi defense that crumbled? She has to put an alibi out. You have to give a name, address, phone number, and facts. Same thing with the alternative suspect. She has to come up with a name, and she has to come up with facts that her team has investigated, which would form a reliable foundation for offering that person's name up to a jury. And she would have to do it in a manner that was timely to allow for the prosecution, for their detectives and their investigators to go out and actually interview this person. So she can't do it. She can't do it. She doesn't have the information like the alibi defense. That's not going to go anywhere. And the jury is not going to be confused by having someone's name thrown out there gratuitously without any sort of foundational grounds to do it.
So in review, basically, in this quick review in the first 12 minutes of the show, it looks like the case is going to go forward on August, I believe it's 11th.
Yeah.
August 11th, because Judge Hippler is not granting the continuance. It's pretty clear because they've already put out jury questionnaires and they're questioning hundreds of thousands of potential jurors. So that throws out the continuance. Number two is it appears that he also sealed the request for an alternate suspect, which also appears to be that he's not going to allow it. So those are the two breaking news things that we see in this case. Right. So I think everyone that's been following this case will be happy to know that this case is going to go forward on August 11th, as it should be, because it's already been 2 years. How long are they going to keep everyone in limbo before this case goes forward? This is from a local Fox News.
Years of hearings and motions. The trial for Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students, is expected to start this summer. Fox 13 has just learned of a closed-door remote hearing held late this morning, and it was scheduled by the judge in this case. We are closely monitoring for any new updates.
Meanwhile, both sides are now focusing on that all-important jury selection. Fox 13's Shira Matsuzawa talked with legal experts about what the defense and the state will likely be on the lookout for.
Well, one expert tells me once that trial starts, those jurors will be the most important people in the courtroom. So they've likely got consultants and have already done mock trials to test how potential jurors will respond to their case.
It's your civic responsibility serving on a jury.
One of the best things about America is our jury system.
And while it's unknown who will serve on the jury for Bryan Kohberger's trial, both sides are gearing up for the jury selection process.
For me, it's like my favorite part of a case because I get a really good sense of who I'll be together with, for the ensuing weeks or months.
Attorney Ann Bremner says before potential jurors set foot into the courthouse, they'll likely fill out a lengthy questionnaire, asking them their views on law enforcement, the death penalty, and if they've ever heard of Bryan Kohberger. From there, attorneys can question the prospective jurors in a process known as voir dire,
And then you start looking at two things. One is indoctrination and the other is kind of exploration. And indoctrination during a jury selection is to try and hit your themes as you talk to jurors, like whatever the themes are for each side, to say, do you agree with this idea? How do you feel about this or that? To try and get people kind of going away a little bit then. And a lot of judges won't allow that, but that's something you try to do.
Dr. Andrea Blunt Hunter is a trial consultant with Mind Matters Jury Consulting. She says they're not looking for a juror who has never heard of Kohberger and how he's accused of murdering University of Idaho students Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle, because that could be difficult considering the media exposure this case has received. But rather, they're looking for a person in the middle.
Those who've heard about it, but understands there's always two sides to a story. And the best case for the defense is just to find someone who's willing to hear their story.
One thing I do in a high profile case, I ask the juror to write everything they've heard about the case. Because if they write down everything they've heard about the case, they're kind of telling me what they think about the case, right?
Both sides are also paying attention to demographics as well as personalities.
Each side will be looking for different relationships people have to authority. For example, the prosecution would want law and order advocates on their side, and there's probably a lot of them in Boise, Idaho. So the defense has a tougher challenge.
She says Kohberger's attorneys will be looking for people who are more skeptical and don't accept things at first glance. There's also another challenge.
One of the dark horses that both sides are afraid of is the juror who really wants to be on this jury.
And she says no one wants that person to slip through because it could lead to a mistrial.
The attorneys will also need to find out if a potential juror has been a victim of a crime before and if they could be susceptible to being traumatized during this trial, because there will likely be difficult crime scene photos and details that come out of it. Jury selection is expected to begin on July 30th, the trial on August 11th. In the newsroom, Shira Matz.
So pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Mike, I wanted to, it's interesting to me that somewhat, and there's a couple of people in the chat that have said, oh, I would love to be on that jury. And I was thinking, well, that disqualifies you immediately. And why? Why is that, Mike? Why is someone that would be eager to be on the jury not a good candidate to be a juror?
I think the reason why they wouldn't want somebody who's eager to be on the jury is they may be eager to convict or eager to exonerate. I think they're looking for the person in the middle who is going to go there and just go there because they've been asked to go there. It's their duty, a civic duty, and that they will sit there and be patient, and they will try and give both sides a fair hearing and make a decision based solely on what was presented at the trial, and try and disregard anything that they've heard in the media, like wild theories. Remember, we talked several years now ago, they were talking about the bartender being or a possible suspect, or a professor being a possible suspect. So they want the person who's in the middle. They just want, that's who they're looking for, the person right in the middle.
Now, Mike, the other thing is, and I'm asking you questions because you are an attorney as well as being a former cop, but in the voir dire process, let's talk about how each side has so many disqualifications for no reason whatsoever. They could not like that person's face. They just don't like the suit that person was wearing or the dress that person was wearing. But then they have to, when they do have other type of disqualifications, they have to give a reason as to why they're disqualifying that person. You want to speak upon that?
Yeah, you're talking about challenges to the jurors. When the jurors come in and they filled out their questionnaire and now they're going to be questioned. And so there's two kinds of challenges that the district attorney has and that the defense attorney has when they're interviewing the potential witnesses. They're called challenges. There are two kinds. There is a challenge for cause, and there's what they call a peremptory challenge. And what you refer to is a peremptory challenge. The prosecution or the defense attorney will use a peremptory challenge when they can't quite put their finger on why they don't like that particular juror. It could be the way the juror is dressed, the way the juror is looking at them, the way the juror is acting. They may be too eager to be if you're a defense attorney and you see somebody who's really looking like they're going to be the law and order person that's going to, decide what their mind made up in a couple of minutes, or somebody who's way out as a space cadet. You really can't put your finger on it, but you just don't want that person on your jury. In Idaho, those are called peremptory challenges, and they're limited to 4. In New York State, in comparison, you would, in a case like this, a murder case, an A felony case, you would get 20. Those are challenges where the defense or the prosecution can get a juror off the panel, off the jury, before they're seated, based on any sort of feeling that they have, whether it's legal, illegal, it doesn't matter. If they don't like the person because of their skin color, it doesn't matter. They don't have to tell the judge why they don't want them. They just have to feel that it's not right for their client. So therefore, they can do that. That's a peremptory challenge, and it's limited. The other challenge is a challenge for cause. And a challenge for cause is when you look at the voir dire and you start asking questions, and someone says, would you be willing to judge fairly on this case? Yes, I am. Anybody in your family been a member of law enforcement? Yes. My father, my grandfather, my brother, my sister, I took the police test. I didn't get on the job. Do you think this person really is going to be able to judge fairly Kohberger's case when his attorney is going to say something? Or do you think they're going to be really a hardcore prosecution juror, a convict him? You would tell the judge, Your Honor, I want to strike that juror for cause because they have a benevolent affiliation with law enforcement. And so the judge will probably agree with you, but if the judge doesn't agree with you, and seats the juror, then that's an appealable issue later. But those for cause challenges are unlimited. So long as you have a good reason why you don't want this person on the jury, and you're willing to say to the judge, this person was a crime victim themselves, they're probably going to convict, or this person has admitted to being arrested. Like, say, for instance, if the defense gets a juror who has been arrested a number of times and they hate the police, they hate the criminal justice system, you want that person as a defense attorney because they probably will not even listen to what the police are saying. The prosecution will say, Your Honor, I want to strike that person for cause because that person is clearly not going to be favorable to the police and law enforcement, and they're going to have their mind made up already. So it's a little bit of art, it's a little bit of science between the unlimited challenges for cause and the very limited peremptory challenges.
Absolutely. I want to thank Carol Grayson, who just gifted 10 police off the cuff memberships to 10 lucky people. Also, folks, if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, share us with your friends and your family. It's important that you like us. It helps the algorithm. And if you want to contribute financially, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. Mike, some of the things you said, it's all true as far as I know, but there are times when a law enforcement officer gets on a jury, even a homicide jury.
Sure.
And in fact, I have my friend Bobby Chacon, retired FBI agent. He was on a homicide case last year that lasted for, I think, 2 or 3 months, and he was the foreperson.
Okay,
and Bobby Chacon, the retired FBI agent, he's also an attorney, he has a law degree. So I don't know what was the mindset of both the prosecution and the defense to put a retired FBI agent not only on the jury, but the foreperson, the boss of the jury.
Billy, before I retired from the job, I got called for a civil case in Westchester County, and I showed up and I go there and I tell them, I'm presently on duty as a New York State police officer. I'm a sergeant, I'm an attorney. But I answered the questions very fairly. I said, look, it's a civil case. It's not involving law enforcement. I'd be very willing to listen to both sides. I have nothing, I don't have the dog in the fight here. And they kept me on the jury, but they ended up settling after one day. So it worked out for me. I just can't imagine any defense attorney that wants a retired police officer. I don't care if it's a deputy sheriff, a Secret Service agent, someone working for the CIA, someone working for the FBI, the NYPD. The only thing I could think of is he answered questions in a way that expressed really a view of fairness to the defendant and a willingness to at least listen, maybe, but that is amazing because I can't imagine that happening, but that's amazing.
Yeah. I wanted to show something, and before they pick jurors in this case, there's a questionnaire, and that'll sort of weed some people out. Just the questionnaire itself. I'm going to put up on the screen a questionnaire, not the questionnaire, because we don't have the questionnaire. But this will suffice to show you about what it's about. This questionnaire is designed to obtain information from you with respect to your qualifications to sit as a juror in this case. The use of this questionnaire allows you to make personal and private communications with the judge and attorneys in this case. Please respond to the following questions as completely as possible. The information contained within the questionnaire will become part of the court's permanent record and will not be distributed to anyone except the judge and the attorneys in the case. If necessary, during the questioning by the attorneys, you will be given an opportunity to explain or expound on your answers. If for any reason you do not wish to answer the questions asked, please write the word private by the questions and we'll take this matter up with you privately. This questionnaire is part of the jury selection process. The questions must be answered by you under penalty of perjury. You should fill out this questionnaire by yourself without consulting any other person. If you wish to make further comments regarding any of your answers, please use the explanation page to do so. Remember to indicate the number of the question you are answering. Please use the pen provided you by the court. If you do not understand the question, please write, "I do not understand," and the question will be explained to you in court. Please realize there are no right or wrong answers, just honest ones. So again, this is not the questionnaire, it is a questionnaire. And now part 2 of this is, and I'll go through this quickly. Where do you work? Unemployed or retired? Where was your last job held? What jobs have you held in the past? 2, highest grade you completed in school. They always want to know the education level of jurors. If college, please list any degrees received. Where does your spouse partner work? Current marital status, single, married, divorced, widowed, other. Where does your spouse partner work and what is this person's job? Unemployed, retired, what was the last job held? List the gender, age, and occupation of your children and stepchildren. Circle any below in which you have experience, training, or education. Adolescent behavior, criminal law, criminology, child development. Anyway, it goes through a very in-depth questions. And I'm not going to go through all of these. There is 21 questions. So with those 21 questions, do you think that the prosecution and the defense can already weed out people before they even start the questioning of them? The questionnaire itself is going to weed out 80 to 90% of the people. Oh no, disqualified. And with a questionnaire like this, a computer could be trained to grade it in a way, disqualify all people that answer XYZ questions in the negative. And then you're going to just be interviewing people that answered the questions the way you want, according to whether you're the prosecution or the defense. And then after this questionnaire is gone through, now they'll be left with how many hundreds of people that will go through the voir dire process. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, there's a lot of questions there that would weed people out. For instance, like you said, you're absolutely right. Have you ever been arrested in the past? Were you ever convicted of a crime in the past? That sort of thing, that will weed you out, because if you say, yes, I was convicted and, I was arrested and convicted in the past, a prosecutor probably won't want you on the jury. A defense attorney would probably want you on the jury. If this is going to be a case where there's going to be a lot of forensics, a lot of, it's not just basic witnesses talking. It's going to be DNA. It's going to be ballistics. It's going to be crime scene photos and a lot of other technical stuff. They probably want someone with a higher level of education. So if you say you have a GED, the defense might want you, or the prosecution might want you, or one might not want you, depending on what they think that you could intellectually handle. Are you retired? If you're retired, you probably tend to be older. They know they can also look at you and say, okay, what did you retire from? What does your spouse do? Do you have any friends or family in law enforcement? They ask questions about firearms. Do you own firearms? Some of these questions I think are a little ridiculous, but because it's, they might as well ask you, what's your favorite TV show or what's your favorite meal? But there's certain questions there that prosecution, you're right. The prosecutor is looking for a fair jury, but one that is kind of leaning towards being favorable to the law enforcement. Defense, they want a fair-minded jury, but they do want people who are willing to doubt law enforcement. Just be a little bit on the cynical side looking at law enforcement. And so,
Mike, the other thing is when they ask education level.
Yeah.
That may be like a snobby thing you'll see like in
Sure.
in the news all the time. They're saying, in a political race, for example, they say, more educated, more college graduates voted for this candidate than that candidate. Well,
Right.
What does that mean? What is that? What are you trying to say? That the people that voted for candidate A as opposed to candidate B, the candidate A's voters had college degrees that they're worth more than candidate B's voters because they have a college education? Absolutely ridiculous. But one thing during the O.J. Simpson trial, and we always refer to that, they spent so much time on the DNA evidence that the jury was falling asleep because it's such a complicated area of evidence. So it might be that you would almost need someone with more education to sit and listen as if they were in like a lecture hall being lectured to about certain type of evidence, because or else they're going to be bored to tears and it's going to go over their head and you're going to lose them. That's just my opinion, Mike.
No, it's true. I will also say Judge Lance Ito lost control of that case because they were only taking testimony, I think at one point, 2 hours a day. And so it went on far longer than it should have. And DNA was in its infancy, really, when you think about it. And they wasted a lot of people's time. They bored people to death. And I think people just tuned, what do they call it? Tune out and drop out or whatever, intellectually. And I think they did that. I think you're absolutely right. If you're going to have a highly technical presentation by the prosecution or defense, you're going to want someone who maybe has gone to college. If you're going to talk about, say, you're going to bring in autism and, later on, you're going to want somebody maybe who went to college and took a course in psychology and at least has heard of these words and these things that they might not teach in a high school. You're right. It seems a little bit snobby, but occasionally it comes in handy to figure out what is this person capable of understanding.
One of the big considerations in this case also is that the jury, whoever they may be, and again, the jury is going to be 12 jurors and 8 alternates. So
Right.
a total of 20 jurors. They're going to be sitting for probably 4 months. So we were talking 16 weeks. Can they pick someone that has a really legitimate job and needs to go to work every day to make money to put them out of work for 4 months? If I was, going to be called for a jury like this, and now I'm retired, but I do my podcast. I'd even say, hey, it's a hardship. I can't do my podcast. But
Right.
the point is that how many people can afford to be out of work for 4 months? And I know it's your civic duty to when you get called to be on a jury. And don't forget, folks, in our Constitution, it says you have a right to be tried by a jury of your peers. So do you want to see people that are not your peers making decisions on your life? That's scary. That's scary because, for example, Bryan Kohberger was a PhD student. So shouldn't a jury of his peers be other educated human beings that are making decisions on his life, a life or death decision in this case? So, and I'm not putting down any people, what they do for a living, their education level, but is, for example, a janitor or an auto mechanic or a domestic or a blue collar worker, is that a jury of Bryan Kohberger's peers? I'll ask that question to you, Mike.
Well, under the Constitution, it is, because so long as you're an American citizen, if you're a PhD student or you're like an Einstein theoretical mathematician, physicist with an IQ of 3,000, the auto mechanic is your peer. That's how they view it in the Constitution. The hardest thing you hit upon is that this isn't going to be a week-long trial or a 2-week-long trial, which is enough. To me, I think that's enough to ask someone to be available for like 3 months, 4 months, maybe. You're really only going to be able to get, a retired person. And so you're going to tend to have older people who are retired tend, not, completely 100%, but tend to be a little bit more conservative than a younger person. So you tend to have maybe a little bit more slightly conservative leaning, law and order kind of loving, jurors. But that is an ordeal. And okay, fine. It is my duty to be a member of the jury, and I would never snub that. I would have to do it. But that would be devastating to people who maybe are working by themselves. They're a mechanic and they don't get paid unless they go to work.
Or someone who's self-employed.
Right.
But
exactly.
then I think, Mike, the court would take that into consideration.
Sure.
And as a hardship, disqualify that person. There's people right here in the chat that's saying, I couldn't do that. I'm a single mother. They would disqualify you based on your hardship. They wouldn't make you put your child in daycare for you to sit on that jury. But then you could see how potentially excellent jurors will be disqualified because they have hardships in their life. And for example, if Mike and I were called for jury duty when we were on the NYPD, and let's just say for argument's sake, we were chosen, we would get paid by the NYPD to sit on that jury. But whatever compensation we would get for being jurors, the NYPD would keep that money.
Yeah, I had to give them the check.
Right.
That I got.
It would be a lot less than we get paid. But
Right.
the other thing in this case is the jury's going to be sequestered. So you're talking, they're going to almost be incommunicado for 4 months with their family. Well, they can talk to their family, but they can't watch television. They can't read newspapers. I would imagine they can't go on the internet because they're in danger of seeing something about this case that could prejudice their decision.
Yeah, Bill, it's an ordeal. And to me, honestly, I think a lot of judges are trying not to sequester jurors any more than they have to because they don't want to make a routine out of it because it does turn off people. And then so what you're going to do is you might get a really perfectly good juror who's going to answer questions in that questionnaire that says, I hate law enforcement, or I hate all defendants, and my mind is made up, just to get off the juror. So that's a sad part about it, is that, the people who are going to do this, God bless them, because it's going to be a long, rough ride, and they're going to give up an awful lot of their life, 3 to 4 months of their life to do this trial. And to me, I know Bryan Kohberger deserved justice. I know the victims deserve justice, but also it just think about what that does to the jurors. And it's really unfair to the jurors.
Absolutely. Let me play this from a local Idaho news.
Senior reporter Don Nelson outside the Ada County Courthouse, where in a few short months, a jury will be selected for the high-profile Bryan Kohberger murder trial. It's the third high-profile case in 3 years, but the jury commissioner says they'll be ready.
Priority one is that there's a fair trial.
I asked District Judge James Cawthon what potential jury members in the Bryan Kohberger case can expect.
We understand that in some instances, in some trials, when jurors come in to hear evidence, to decide facts, there are times when they're going to hear things that aren't part of their lives, that can be troubling or disturbing. And so we want to make sure that they are taken care of.
Jury Commissioner Randy Rutland believes that's why his staff has been recognized nationally for how they treat jury members and how a recent change to the jury selection is making it easier for potential jurors.
Nowadays, we'll text you when you're needed. Basically, if it's a day or a couple days before, with all of your instructions on where to park, what room to come to, what time to be here.
Usually, jury summons are sent out 5 weeks in advance of the trial. So when can we expect jury summons for the Kohberger trial to start arriving in mailboxes across the county?
If you get a jury summons at the end of June, first part of July, there is a chance that could be for the Kohberger case. Fair to say?
I'd say that's fair to say. We do a lot of jury trials here in Ada County, 350-ish every single year. So we do a lot of jury trials. And we're not going to stop doing jury trials just because we have a high-profile case. So it's really hard to say, because you may be getting it for a completely different trial. I will tell you, though, with the Daybell trial and Vallow trial, we use several different rooms of the courthouse to bring jurors in because of the mass amount of jurors that you bring in for a trial like that.
I asked Judge Cawthon about Judge Stephen Hippler, who will be presiding over this high-profile case.
He's a judge's judge. When judges decide who do we want to be kind of our leader and in charge of us, he is someone that we have time and time again turned to.
How is Judge Hippler, in your view, preparing himself for this trial?
He is just solidly involved in addressing the motions that are filed, making sure that the preparations for that case, whether it's with the attorneys, with those that are going to be involved in that case, that all those things are being taken care of.
If you are chosen for a long trial, which is expected in the Kohberger case, your compensation goes from $10 to $50 after 5 days in court. Reporting from...
That's still not a lot of money, but, one of the things that, thank God, really, these days is that people just can't get off cases like these. They can't just say, oh, I don't like, I've already made a decision. I already think he's guilty. They will question that person more. They're not going to just disqualify that person because that's a thinly veiled attempt to get off the case just because you don't want to sit on a jury for 3 or 4 months. And I don't blame you, but they want the very best people to serve on this jury. So back in the day, years ago, everyone would get, if you could just, I don't want to be on the jury, they dismiss you. No longer, because a jury of your peers should mean that. And if every jury is looking like not the jury you would want, then something had to be done. And it was done. And they're much stricter now with someone getting disqualified for serving on a jury. Mike.
Oh, yeah. 30 or 40 years ago in New York, every single jury looked like, a senior citizen get together. And I'm a senior citizen now, so don't take offense. But, there was nobody in their 30s or 40s or 20s. And New York State started cracking down on it is a difficult thing to do, to be a juror, because you have to have the ability to be able to be free from whatever personal and professional things that you have constraining you. But we do need, on a philosophical level, jurors of the whole spectrum of people. We need people who are truck drivers. We need people who are doctors. We need people who are retired law enforcement. We need a pilot. We need a nurse. We need all of these people to come together. We can't just have a bunch of old retired people to do this. No, it's not fair to them. It's not fair to the defendant, because the defendant, as you say, they have to have a jury of their peers. And we want a mixed jury of their peers. We want men and women. It used to be, if you were a housewife, you automatically got off. You know, if you were in law enforcement, you automatically got off. If your third brother's cousin-in-law was a firefighter, you got off. Everybody got off. And so what you end up with a jury that doesn't have anything, no relation whatsoever to the defendant. And realistically, we don't want to do that. The hardest part is, as you get a trial like this, or the Lori Vallow trial, they're going to go on for so long that even people who would want to be there, sometimes they just can't do it. They just can't do it because of their professional obligations.
You know, Mike, someone from the chat was asking, let me see if I can find the person. Will, the jurors are going to have to see some really horrific things in this case. Here, Sarah C. Would people be offered counseling after the trial? I would assume that if they request it, they would offer it to them. Yeah, they're going to have to look at some horrific crime scene photos. They're going to have to hear some horrific medical testimony by the pathologist. They're going to have to listen to a lot of evidentiary evidence that has to do with DNA, investigative genetic genealogy, all of these things. So to answer your question, Sarah C., if the person or the juror is bothered that much by what they saw, what they witnessed, I guess they could request counseling, and I would think that the state would pay for it. But look, I'm not doubting any of that. I mean, Mike and I have seen horrific things that sometimes can wake you up in the middle of the night. And, we're still going about our lives, lots of years later. I mean, some of the most horrific things I've seen, I don't want to go into it, but we're adults, and, people see things throughout their life that make them stronger. When they say what doesn't kill you will make you stronger, you can either believe that or not believe that. I want everyone to also remember that this case was exacerbated by the Dateline NBC.
Just steps from campus in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022. 4 University of Idaho students, Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were stabbed to death. Their accused killer, Bryan Kohberger, faces trial this summer. He's pleaded not guilty. For the last 2.5 years, Dateline has been on the ground, reporting, gathering, and learning from people with direct knowledge of the case. We've obtained things that have never before been seen publicly, like these security videos from a camera on a house near the murder scene, videos that show a white sedan, a car that investigators believe was driven by Bryan Kohberger, making repeated passes of the King Road house that night before the murders. With evidence like this and our reporting, we have assembled a timeline for the weeks, months, and days before and after the murders. Starting with a pool party Kohberger attended in July, just after he moved to the area in pursuit of his PhD in criminology. An exclusive interview with a woman who exchanged numbers with Kohberger, then did not return his text.
The universe intervened and for whatever reason just distracted me from further engaging in that interaction.
We'll also reveal records from Kohberger's cell phone that are in the possession of law enforcement and Google searches regarding the serial killer Ted Bundy. We have also seen these: dozens of photos in Kohberger's cell phone, browsing history, women from Washington State and the University of Idaho, including close friends of the King Road victims. Dateline has also obtained records showing the details of what an FBI cell phone expert has claimed to be in the months before the murders, 23 occasions when Kohberger's phone connected to a cell tower, providing coverage to within 100 meters of the house at 1122 King Road. And in the hours after the murders, details of the timing of phone calls Bryan Kohberger made to a phone linked to his parents just before the controversial selfie he took. And we'll talk to the mother whose daughter was supposed to be staying in the house the night of the murders, but a change of plans may have saved her daughter's life.
How soon was it that you thought, my God, she was going to be there?
I didn't think about that right away.
Oh.
All I could think about was the kids.
Makes you sad too, doesn't it?
does. Sorry.
So many damaged families. Angela Nevejas told us that her daughter Ashlyn, Maddie Mogan's best friend, moved away from Idaho and now refuses to come home to visit because of the trauma associated with the murders. She's hoping some of that may change and Ashlyn will start to grieve after Bryan Kohberger's trial. Back to you, Greg and Savannah.
Such a hard.
So again, that is one of the reasons that show right there, Dateline NBC, which millions and millions of people watched, and it gave out information to the public that none of us knew about before. And that was against the gag order. So it has yet to come out by Judge Hippler, who was threatened to appoint a special prosecutor to find out who made those leaks. But that's what they're dealing with. That's what they're dealing with in obtaining, getting, granting, picking, choosing a fair jury. And that Dateline NBC case makes it that much more difficult. But I'd also like to point out that there was information that got out to the public that was part of the courts releasing, because once it's in a court document, it's free. It's freedom of information. They call it FOIA now, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. We used to call it FOIL, Freedom of Information Law. So all of that stuff was out of there. So what's the difference between it getting out there based on the fact that was in a court document, and now everyone's free, and the press is free because they have freedom of the press to publish it and paste it and broadcast it all over the world. But because this was leaked and it was specifically information forbidden by the judge to be released, it's more prejudicial. Mike?
Bill, you brought up a good point. A lot of the information that was released on Dateline, some of it is brand new and some of it was somewhat known a little bit, thought about, hinted at, and other information has already been released in court documents. And therefore, like you say, it's FOIA. And does it really matter how the information gets to the public? If it comes from a motion that is unsealed and made public, or comes in a dramatic telling with Keith Morrison on the MSNBC case, MSNBC show.
Dateline, Mike.
Dateline. Thank you. Dateline NBC. So therefore, it doesn't really matter. And when you talk to people every day and you tell people, what are you doing? Oh, I'm doing a podcast on the Kohberger case. Some people are like, what's that? There are a lot of people who don't actually even follow the case, or if they heard something, they're like, oh, I've heard a few things. You don't get a perfect jury. There's no such thing as a perfect system. The defense is entitled to a fair and impartial trial before a jury of their peers. And so that means that you have a jury that is at least willing, even if they have heard things, at least willing to base a decision on guilt or innocence on only what they hear in court by witnesses under oath, and disregard all kinds of conspiracy stuff they may have heard. If you can get 12 people to do that, that's what Kohberger's entitled to. There's no way, even 100 years ago, 50 years ago, when you had newspapers and radio, you would still run into this issue. Oh my God, the trial of the century, this trial of the century. Every 10 years, there's a new trial of the century, and we talk about this issue. So therefore, there's going to be a lot of people who will be able to say, I've heard things, but I haven't made up my mind. Yeah, I'm willing to listen. That's all that Kohberger is entitled to. People who are willing to listen to both sides.
I 100% agree with you, Mike, that they will be successful in seating an unbiased, nonpartisan, fair jury. 12 people that will sit on this jury, 8 other alternates. I firmly believe that. And is it done by the wave of a wand? No, it's done by the voir dire process. It's done by the questionnaire process, and it's done by professional defense attorneys and professional prosecutors that will seat the very most fair jury that they can possibly seat. And because in our system, whether guilty or innocent, a suspect is allowed to have a trial among a jury of his peers. That's what it says in the Constitution. And the person being charged is presumed innocent till proven guilty. And he must be proven guilty, barred, that's the acronym I use, beyond a reasonable doubt, right? So remember that. It'll be on my next quiz, folks.
All right.
Beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is also our system. And it also is an adversarial system, right? It's an adversarial system where the prosecution needs to prove the person guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Does the defense have to prove anything? No, they don't have to prove a damn thing. But what they have to do is create doubt. Create doubt through their questioning, create doubt through the evidence, create doubt through the way they cross-examine witnesses. And that is our adversarial system. Mike.
Yeah, you're right, Billy. They don't have the Kohberger can sit there and Ann Taylor can sit there and do nothing. But of course they won't. She'll cross-examine and just pick things out that a witness may have missed or that she disagrees with through leading questions on cross-examination. Just show the jury that maybe there is some doubt, that there is some doubt as to the veracity of what the witness said, the accuracy of what the witness said, about the DNA. Maybe there's a different way of looking at the DNA, even though it's usually pretty damning for a defendant, that sort of thing, just to try and create the existence of some sort of reasonable doubt, and at the same time, or offer an alternative. And for Ann Taylor, the alternative would have been an alibi, or it would have been a alternative suspect, to offer up something else for the jury to look at and say, that is plausible. Well, it doesn't look like we're going to have that. So she has her work cut out for her, but he does enjoy the presumption of innocence 100%.
Absolutely. E from the chat. Let's be real. Many people don't watch the news and live under a rock. There are plenty of unbiased and uninformed people for them to choose from. It will be okay for them. E, I agree with everything you said except for one thing. There are plenty of unbiased. I don't want someone who's uninformed. That they don't know about this, is that a plus or a minus? But I want someone that knows what time it is in this world. I don't want someone who lives under a rock, because that would imply to me that they can't be counted on to have common sense if they're living under a rock. So there are plenty of unbiased. Yes, that's good. Uninformed? No, I don't want someone, if I'm a prosecutor or a defense attorney, I don't want someone on the jury who's uninformed. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, Billy, I want somebody who's an active reader, an active analyzer, an active listener. I want somebody who is, like you say, somebody who's actually not, sitting there at home and, playing some sort of game on their computer. I want somebody who's actually, living a life and reading and listening to whatever it happens to be. Not just true crime, politics, history, whatever it happens to be. But I do want somebody who is actually an active learner. And so therefore, because this case, whether you're a defense attorney or you're a prosecutor, you want those jurors to learn what is being presented and what is not being presented, what looks favorable to the prosecution and what also may look favorable to defense. You want a juror who has some sort of, analytical ability.
Absolutely. Wicked Curves from the chat. I was talking about this case with coworkers, and nobody I work with know about this case. Not everyone watches the news. Wicked Curves, you're 100% correct. I sometimes will bring up this case to people in my gym, and a lot of them have no idea what I'm talking about because they're not following it. And people have busy lives. People follow certain things that they like to follow in the news, and maybe this isn't what they like to follow. And just to give you a great example, and I think many of you ladies know this, but Are you aware that 70% of the subscribers to my channel are women? Did you guys know that? Well, you know it now. And sometimes it's up to 72 or 73%. And I can even give you the ages if you want, but I won't do that. But so 72, 73%, what does that say? Well, the true crime audience are mostly females, and it's reflected in my audience. And I'm sure many other true crime content creators, it's reflected in their audience also. I just thought that would be an interesting little tidbit for you guys. I want to play a little bit of this from Crime Fix with Anjanette Levy.
A fan of surprises, as you may have figured out by now. I want to know in advance, as far as possible, when there are issues that need to be addressed.
The judge in Bryan Kohberger's case, laying down the law and the rules ahead of Kohberger's trial for the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Plus, the judge drops a bomb about the fallout from a leak of evidence about Kohberger to a national news outlet.
I would be open to a request for a appointment of a special prosecutor.
So you could see just how seriously Judge Hippler took those leaks. And everyone's guessing, did they come from the defense? And most people think that the defense had more reason to leak that to Dateline NBC than the prosecution. But I think it's almost a sure thing that someone from the prosecutorial side leaked it to Dateline NBC. And it's been implied by Judge Hippler. It's been implied by Prosecutor Bill Thompson. So we will find out at some point. And just so you know, the person or persons who leaked this, the crime that they committed is called contempt of court, and it is a misdemeanor. So they could be charged with a misdemeanor contempt of court for violating Judge Hippler's gag order. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, you do not want to be that person who is found out to have leaked. And I think that, like you, I agree, it's probably law enforcement because they have all that access to that information. I don't think it would come from Ann Taylor's office, but you don't want to be on the receiving end of Judge Hippler's thunderbolt in this case. No way, no how. You could, you may lose your job over this and get a criminal conviction. This is serious stuff. And the persons who leaked that information, they're probably very scared right now because they could be looking at the end of their career. And Judge Hippler, I think it would be the kind of person that may give them a little jail time too.
Wow. That's a heavy penalty, but this is a very, very serious matter, especially in a capital case.
Yeah.
This is a death penalty case, folks. So for someone to leak pertinent information, pertinent evidence to Dateline NBC, who does a documentary on it for 2 hours long that's seen by millions of people. Could that affect this case? Yeah, 100%. Jet Set J. This is such a serious case that I really hope that Thompson does not take a lead role because his looks are so unusual and off-putting that I don't think some people will take him seriously. Jet Set J, I think Bill Thompson's been he is the district attorney of Latah County for many, many years. I think in excess of 20 years. Yeah, does he look like ZZ Top or, and he actually is a musician. He's actually in a bluegrass band. So you hit that one on the head, but looks can be deceiving, and I'm sure he's very, very competent at his job. So let's not just say, oh, he doesn't look the part. I think he's probably good at his job. When we put our thinking caps on, let's remember that this case was solved. They had a perpetrator in custody in 6 weeks. And if you recall, around November 13th, 2022, when this occurred, 6 weeks later, all the TV stations were saying, is this a cold case? Should the FBI take over this case? Should the CIA take? I mean, it was ridiculous. I was in homicide for 10 years out of my 27 years, And trust me, many cases take over 6 weeks, 6 months, a year to solve. So for the media to say, is this a cold case, was ridiculous, Mike.
Yeah, I don't think that people have to worry about Brian Thompson. Okay, he may look like an off-duty Santa Claus, but the fact is he will be second seated and maybe third seated with two excellent, probably experienced attorneys handing him the documents as he's going to ask questions, and handing him folders as he stands up. So he's going to be the voice of the state, and he's going to be doing the majority of the questioning of the witnesses. But I think he's going to be well assisted by probably one or if not two attorneys, making sure, keeping him on track, handing him things when he wants, pointing things out when he wants to. So he's going to be well ready for this case. No worries.
Wicked Curves, thank you. Wicked Curves became a new member of the Police Off the Cuff family. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So I hope that we brought you some new information here. One of the newest pieces of information, of course, is that it appears to be, and I can't say 1,000%, but that this case is going on August 11th. It's going forward. He's not granting a continuance. He's not allowing the alternate suspect theory. So this judge is true to his word. He's a tough judge. He makes decisions based upon the law, based upon case history, precedent. And that's what he holds his whole decisions upon, is the law and those things. And he doesn't waver. And for that, I think you have to say he's a pretty damn good judge. Mike, your final thoughts.
I think Judge Hippler is an excellent jurist for this case because he sets precedent and he goes by precedent, and he wants stability and predictability. And I think that's what everybody wants for the law and for their criminal procedure. So in this case, you got a great judge. And I think Bryan Kohberger will get justice, whatever that turns out to be. Judge Hippler will ensure that he gets justice.
Mike, I agree. And I think that, with the large amount of the jury pool, they're saying hundreds of thousands of people are going to fill out these questionnaires. And then after the questionnaires, they're going to pick a group of maybe 80 or 100 and then whittle that down to 20 people and whittle that down to the 12 jurors that will actually be the live jurors on the case, and then the 8 alternates. So I believe that Bryan Kohberger will get a fair trial, and this process will ensure that. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. On behalf of myself, Professor Mike Geary, and all the Police Off the Cuff family, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great night, everyone, and God bless.
Good night.
One episode